Lecture 9, On Top of the Mountain, Religious Studies 100. What I hope to do in this section is to give you a sense of two things. One, the theophany on top of Mount Sinai, as recorded in the book of Exodus, predominantly chapters 19 through 20, 21, 22, and continuing. And two, to give you a sense of what it means to read it critically. So in the context, the Hebrews in Egypt, now as they exit, the children of Israel, have made their way across Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds, or the Red Sea, to Mount Sinai. The narrative in the late teens of Exodus, of Moses going up and down. And now, the only great mass revelation in the Bible. That is in Exodus 20, God speaks to the entire people who are assembled, or at least all the men. And I tried to point that out to you in the quiz, some of the ambiguity about women and whether it's only addressed to the men. I showed you in the text where there's a change of speaker's voice, that clearly in the opening verses, God is speaking. I am the Lord your God who led you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. You should have no other gods before me. God is a speaker. But as you move later into the text, God is then spoken of as in the third person. So I tried to show you that as well. But what I really want to do is to use it as an example of people knowing things about the Bible that are not true about the Bible. So for your homework, I had you take these verses from Exodus 20, and without knowing that they were the 10 Commandments, I asked you to break them up into individual commandments. And almost everybody, when that happens, does not get 10. Most people get more than 10. Most people get in the range of 14 to 17. I'm not convinced that there's a right answer. It's a question about how you read things. What's an individual commandment? If you get really tough on each individual commandment and do things like honor your father as a commandment, honor your mother as a commandment, and so forth, you can get almost 30 commandments, individual rules, out of this passage of 17 verses. My issue is not how many you get. My issue is that forcing it, that this passage should be 10, is a square peg, round hole moment. You can make it work, but there are multiple ways to make it work. And if you recall in your textbook, if not, you should pull it out and look at it. There are at least 3 different systems, accepted systems, 1 Jewish and 2 Christian, about what are the 10 Commandments. Now I want you to think about that every time you hear somebody say the 10 Commandments, like there is a set of 10 Commandments, and everybody agrees what they are. So there is not. Then the second thing that I want you to see is that this passage here is not referred to as the 10 Commandments. If you go ahead to Exodus chapter 34, you will see a passage, again, Moses on top of the mountain, just God and Moses, not a mass theophany. One of the things I did not point out, here, is at the beginning God is speaking, and God is speaking to the children of Israel in the second person, and it's in the plural, though that's hard to see in the Hebrew. But when we make this switch, there's a sense that God is no longer speaking to everybody, because now it reads like if you were to read a law code. God is no longer speaking, it's just telling the people what to do. Jump ahead to Exodus 34. God is dictating to Moses and talking to just Moses. And then we have this long list, and if you look, there are similarities, but there are things that are very, very different. Right? There are rules of sacrifice, rules about the holidays, rules about dietary restrictions, rules that don't appear in the other covenant code in Exodus 20. But then if you look down at the bottom, if you look here, beginning in verse 27 and 28, God, the Lord said to Moses, write these words. In accordance with these words, I have made a covenant with you and with Israel. He was there, that is Moses, with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. He neither ate bread nor drank water, and he wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, the 10 Commandments. So the expression 10 Commandments, at least according to this NRSV English, refers to the passage in Exodus 34. Yet when people say 10 Commandments, they never refer to Exodus 34. But this is what the book of Exodus, what the Torah, what the Bible says is the passage called Aseret HaDevarim, these 10 Commandments. Again, following the NRSV English. Now that's already shocking, correct? That the passage the Bible calls the 10 Commandments is not the passage that Judaism and Christianity and people in kind of popular culture call the 10 Commandments. Now you could do an activity where you could look at this passage and identify the 10 that are here, but unequivocally you do not get the same commandments as you get from Exodus 20. And I'll go one step even further. You know how to do this now. If you were to go to Bible Hub and look up, sorry, computer's a little slow at the moment. If you were to go to Bible Hub and look up Exodus 34, verse 28, and then click up here on the Hebrew tab, right? So I'm in BibleHub.com. I entered Exodus 34:28. I clicked Hebrew, and it comes up with this table of the verse broken down word by word in the Hebrew. And already, if you look at the English that's given here, it will tell you that, excuse me, the words of the covenant, 10, the commandments. And it's kind of fun, by the way. Here, this word is the words. This word is the commandments. But if you look over here, it is the same exact word. Meaning what they translate here as words, the words of the covenant. It's the same thing that's down here that should be the 10 words. The words of the covenant, the 10 words, or the 10 speakings, or the 10 sayings. If I click on that number, 1,697, the strong number, you'll see that according to the Englishman's Concordance, that word appears 1,441 times. If you come over here to the New American Standard Bible Exhaustive Concordance, you will see that out of 1,441 times, they list 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 times. That's less than 1% that it means commandments. And I would argue if you look at all 16 of those, it would never mean commandments. The word is a speech word. You are telling somebody something. And so if we go back to that biblical verse, it should say, Moses was on the mountain with God 40 days and 40 nights. He neither ate bread nor drank water. And he wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, the 10 sayings, or the 10 words, or the 10 speakings. Something that stresses the verbal nature of it, that is, God spoke them, Moses wrote them, rather than that they are commandments. And I would go further. The tradition to call them commandments is a religiously biased tradition that rather than looking at all the rules of the 5 books of Moses, and there are hundreds of them, and there are categories in Hebrew, chukot, chukim, mishpatim, mitzvot, a whole variety of rules, statutes, ordinances, and different sources have a different system as to what makes something a chok versus a mishpat versus a mitzvah. But there is a kind of prevailing Christian tradition that takes away all the commandments and reduces it to the Exodus 20 passage that wants to be called the 10 Commandments, as arguing from a religious perspective for Christianity that those commandments are still in play. Now we'll look at what the New Testament says about the rules of the Hebrew Bible, but the idea that there are 10 commandments that Christians must follow is a Christian reading, and it affects the way that that word, devarim, gets translated. And it's why if you go and look at those 16 cases, according to the NAS, the word that clearly means word, spoken, speech, it's a verbal meaning, gets translated in those contexts as commandments. And I want to help us be freed from the religious biases of anybody and to read the Bible as is. So when we read the Bible as is, I want you to see that Exodus 20 is not called 10 anything. Exodus 34, the covenant that's made there, is between Moses and God for all the people, is called the 10 sayings, the 10 words, the 10 speakings, and then it gets translated as the 10 commandments. And then there's this shift, this sleight of hand, to make it that what Exodus 34 calls the 10 sayings, 10 commandments, gets shifted over to be Exodus 20. And you can do a comparison if you want to. We would have done if we were in class. Okay? Finally, so that is the Mosaic covenant, which is really the covenant between God, the children of Israel, Moses, and all their descendants for all times. And I showed you the Exodus 20, the Exodus 34. I introduced the idea that Exodus 20 is the only mass revelation in the Bible where God speaks directly, not to Moses, not to a prophet, but God speaks directly to at least 603,000 men, if not perhaps 2 million of everybody. Again, I'm not being historical. I'm putting it in the literary context of the Bible. And that revelation is a theophany. Theo meaning God, phony meaning sounds, phonetics, and so forth. Theophany, proper pronunciation, God speaking or God being heard. And that is the covenant. We will talk more about it in the future. Thank you very much.